Well, welcome everyone to another dose of science. Hope you got your vaccine. I'm going to get my second dose, but not quite for a while, coming up in June. So I'm still being very careful about who I meet. And I don't have to worry here because, of course, my colleagues Jonathan and Ada are with us, but not really. We're not in the same room. We are physically distancing. I want to start today with a word about denim. Why denim? Because a couple of days ago, on May 11th, it was National Denim Day. And this has to do with that dreaded word cancer. It's probably the most fearsome word in the English language. And why is it connected to denim? Because on Denim Day, there are efforts to raise money for research into cancer. And of course, that is the only way that we have a chance of conquering this disease is by raising sufficient funds for research. And we do this at McGill through the Goodman Research Center. And for, about 15 years, they've selected a date in May. This year, it was May 11th. In 2019, as you can see here, it was the 14th. And attempt is made to raise money for research and tends to be very, very successful. Now, why is this connected to denim? That was started actually by the Lee Jean Company. When a number of ladies working for the company, this goes back many, many years now, found that they were diagnosed almost simultaneously with cancer. And they decided to do something about this. And that's how Denim Day was born, obviously. I think it had a little marketing slant there too. And the idea was to wear denim on that day and also to raise money. And the company also donated money at the same time, matching funds. Of course, we all have an interesting relationship with denim, don't we? Because it is part of our uniform. We wear it all the time. Let's give a little bit of a thought to the color, because it is such an attractive color. And that color, of course, is indigo. Where does it come from? As you might guess, originally it comes from India, hence the name indigo. And it comes from a plant. You look at the plant here, you don't see any blue. And indeed, there is no blue in the indigo plant. There is a compound in there called indican, which is not blue, but through a series of fermentation reactions, it is converted to the blue dye, which is indigotin. This is a fascinating set of reactions because originally one of the ingredients that was used to start off this fermentation, believe it or not, was urine. The indican was boiled up in large vats of urine, as you can imagine, rather smelly kind of a business, to produce indigotin. It was introduced into Europe by Marco Polo on one of his many journeys to the Orient. And in England, at least, it was not welcomed. Why not? Because there already was a blue that was being produced in England, and it came from a different plant. It came from the woad plant. Now, the active ingredient in there is indican also, so it's also a stinky procedure to produce it. But they did. This is the dye that was used on face paints because it terrorized the enemy. But when indigo was introduced into England, as I said, people didn't want it because the woad industry was threatened. The woad industry was a very stinky industry. As you can imagine, fermenting something with urine produces a whole bevy of smells. Indeed, Queen Elizabeth decreed that no dye plant could be near any of her places of domicile because she did not want to be offended by the smell of this material. And in England, they called indigo the devil's dye, and suggested that anyone who was going to use indigo would be cursed. This obviously was to protect the woad industry. But in India, the indigo could be produced very, very efficiently, rather cheaply, and was imported into England, and essentially it killed off the woad industry. And, money was obviously at the bottom of all of this, and it was cheaper, so it became more popular. It became so popular that indigo was chosen as the official color for the Navy uniforms of British sailors. And in the United States, woad was planted, and there too it was replaced by indigo. And that has kind of a rather sad aspect to it, because the indigo industry in the US was mostly worked by slaves. And then along came Levi Strauss, who found a major use for indigo as a dye. He was selling pants to miners, and the blue color was one that didn't show dirt as much as the canvas pants, the beige canvas pants that he was selling before. So he dyed them with indigo. And they became very popular, especially because they had copper rivets so that the fabric would not tear. And this was widely advertised. It became very, very popular among miners. And there were rivets in the pockets, and also, as you can see here, in the crotch. Well, today, the jeans don't have a rivet in the crotch. And therein lies a story. Maybe apocryphal, maybe not. The story is that a group of miners were sitting around the campfire in their riveted jeans. And the rivet in the crotch got so hot that it burned a rather sensitive part of their anatomy. And thenceforth, the rivet in the crotch disappeared. But the problems with indigo and raising it as a plant were laid aside when Adolf von Baeyer, German chemist, found a way to synthesize indigotin in the laboratory from a starting material that he isolated from petroleum. And this, of course, changed the industry totally. And it had some interesting spin-offs, because in India, where thousands and thousands of acres had been devoted to growing indigo because it was profitable, now, of course, there was no need for it because it could be made industrially by chemical synthesis. So all of the land in India that had been devoted to growing indigo became devoted to growing crops. So it reduced the famine in India. It's very interesting how changes in one part of the world can have an effect elsewhere. It's just, another example of the idea that if a butterfly flaps its wings in the Orient, we feel it here in North America. Obviously not literally, but you get the idea of the message. So today, indigo is widely used. Women and men wear jeans colored with indigo. It's all synthetic. Children, of course, also love indigo. And believe it or not, it is also used in food. The strong blue color that you see in blue M&Ms is synthetic indigo. And this is creating a problem because the company has pledged to remove all synthetic dyes from its products. Why? Because there are concerns that it may cause hyperactivity in children, and there's issues with the potential toxicity of these chemicals. So there's a big search to find a natural way to color M&M's candies blue. But blue does not come easily from nature. There is a blue that can be extracted from blue-green algae. That is natural enough, but it is anemic. And people are complaining that the M&Ms don't look the way that they used to. So the search is on for a much better blue dye. And just recently, a paper was published, a very interesting one, where they find that it is possible to extract of all places, from cabbage, an anthocyanin that can be used as a blue dye. Many of you will know the classic experiment. If you take cabbage juice, you put in acid, it's red. You put it into base, it turns blue. Well, the anthocyanin that makes it turn blue is not present in a very high concentration. And that's the problem. There's not enough of it in cabbage. But these researchers found a way to change some of the other anthocyanins in the cabbage to the desired one with the use of an enzyme. But therein lies the problem. Is it still going to be natural? Is it still a natural dye if you're taking something out of the cabbage and you're using an enzyme to convert it to another compound? But that enzyme comes from a natural source. It comes from E. coli bacteria. So far, still natural, except that E. coli is genetically altered to make it produce the sought-after enzyme. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they're going to be able to label this as a natural dye. So there's the story of indigo and its relationship to raising funds for breast cancer. And if you are able to, of course, donating to any cancer research establishment is most welcome any day of the year, but of course, especially on Denim Day. So that's what we have about denim. And we'll get down to some other interesting things that we're going to talk about. And of course, there always are interesting things to talk about. And we'll skip over to Jonathan, because we're getting into spring. We're getting to sunny days, although it's still cooler than it should be. And people are starting to put on their sunglasses, and they're asking questions about them as well. Jonathan.
Yeah, the timing is bad because we're losing the light. The clouds are moving in, it's raining, and we're going to talk about sunglasses because ultraviolet light, it's a problem, and it comes at us straight on, but it can also come at us from reflections off of the ground, from the sides. And there are many eye diseases that correlate with exposure to UV light. Things like precancerous growths on the eyelid, snow blindness. There are conditions that affect the back of the eye called the retina. And children are particularly sensitive to UV light, much more so than adults. And so, a couple of years ago, I was interested in looking at this idea of, if you buy cheap sunglasses, are you still fully protected against ultraviolet light? And my thinking at the time was that no, probably you have to pay a certain amount in order to get that kind of protection. But it turns out that sunglasses that have this little UV 400 sticker on it, UV 400 protection, that means that it blocks essentially all ultraviolet lights, which are at a wavelength of 400 nanometers. That's why the 400 is there. And if you're not sure, you can actually take your sunglasses to an optician. So and these are usually in places where they will sell eyewear, where they will sell sunglasses. There might be a station at the back. There's an optician there. They have a spectrometer, and they can actually test your sunglasses. And I bought a very, very cheap pair of sunglasses from the dollar store, and it had the little UV 400 sticker on it. And I took it to the optician, and sure enough, it blocks all ultraviolet light, which is good. There was a Canadian study that was done of 200 pairs of sunglasses that were on sale in Quebec City, and all sunglasses that they bought that were above $21 in price, they all met the UV protection standards that they were interested in. And very interestingly enough, almost all of the cheaper ones, cheaper than 21 bucks, also did as well. Now, the thing that you're not going to get from a very cheap pair of sunglasses usually is clarity. And so cheaper glasses, the lenses are not great in terms of visibility, of seeing clearly what is happening around you. There might be some distortions as well. So that can be annoying, can even be potentially hazardous if you're using them for very precise tasks. The question that comes up often is, does the tint of the sunglasses, these are sort of greenish gray sunglasses, sort of, does the tint have any kind of bearing on UV protection? And the answer is no. It really is just a question of preference. Different tints will have a different effect on the colors that you will perceive, but they don't have an actual effect on UV protection. Then there's polarization. which is a trick of the lens that will sort of block certain wavelengths of light that are coming in at a particular angle. That also has no impact on UV filtration, but it will cut down on glare that you might get from horizontal surfaces. And funnily enough, if you're a pilot, I was told that polarized lenses are not recommended because the instruments in the airplane have this anti-glare coating, and those polarized sunglasses may interfere with that. And also wraparound sunglasses are quite useful because UV light does not always come at you from straight on, but it can come at it from the sides. And so if you have wraparound sunglasses, you might have better protection for your eyes. So when you're outside, even when it's cloudy, especially in the summer, sunglasses are your friends.
Have they ever tried to make like sunglasses contacts?
Ooh, or like transition contact lenses.
Yeah.
I don't know. Joe, have you ever heard of that?
I haven't, but I mean, I don't see any reason why that would not be possible, because there certainly are contact lenses that are colored, right?
Right.
So it should be possible. Yeah, maybe they exist. We'll look into that. But
if somebody watching this knows about this, email us. We'll take a look.
And I would be doing a disservice to our viewers if I didn't ask you about the tint of your glasses.
Yes, so I have photophobia, and so bright lights give me headaches, and so this is to diminish the intensity of the light that I see.
Our transition. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask if transitions glasses are effective for blocking out UV just as well as normal sunglasses.
So transition lenses, actually, the transition itself depends on ultraviolet light. And there's a twist here because when I wrote my piece, and this is on our website, mcgill.ca/OSS, if you type in sunglasses, you'll find it. And I spoke to an optician about this who told me that the issue is that when you're inside your car, UV light is partially blocked by the windshield. And so your sunglasses, your transition sunglasses, may not darken as much as they should, because they are not picking up the full UV light that you will see. And so, he was telling me that more recent technology can sort of partly get around that, but not completely. So transition lenses depend on UV light, but if there's already a filter around you that is filtering out some of that UV light, your transition lenses will not behave quite the way that you would like them to.
I know that the original transition lenses were based on the same chemistry as photography, as black and white photography with silver compounds.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And it was a question of silver ions being converted into metallic silver. So very interesting. I suspect that today there are more sophisticated techniques to do that. But, one thing I've always been struck by is the cost of sunglasses. I mean, for hundreds of dollars, and as we know from your report, doesn't make any difference in terms of efficacy, style, essentially. But still, I mean, the markup on those things is just phenomenal.
But it's not just sunglasses; it's regular eyewear. It regularly makes the there are usually media pieces about this all the time, every year, about how there's such a markup on just regular eyeglasses, and there are a few people that are selling sort of discounted, eyewear, because it's just, you shouldn't have to pay hundreds of dollars for eyewear given the technology that we have at our disposal.
Right.
And especially given that it's not covered under Canadian healthcare, to then mark it up even more.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can't go through one of these webcasts without referencing COVID-19 because it's still with us. I come across this interesting piece from Australia. It's from the Australian government, and they answer questions from people. So obviously they must have had this question several times because they devote quite an answer to it. The question is, can COVID-19 vaccines connect me to the internet?
Well, if there's Bill Gates' microchip in them, yes.
Right. Well,
I kind of wish it would.
That is what triggers the question. And of course they go through and say that, the M in messenger RNA does not mean that you're getting messages or sending out messages to the internet. But what is fascinating about this is that they actually went to the trouble to answer this question, which one would think should not even be raised, but there it is.
I mean, look, the current big anti-vaxxing talking point right now is the claim that is absurd that people who have been vaccinated are shedding parts of the coronavirus, and that people who have not been vaccinated need to stay away from people who have been. So, I mean, it's just they're just making up stuff every week, starting from the conclusion that vaccines are bad, we don't want them, and trying to justify this and changing the narrative every week. And then we have to run behind that and try to figure out, where is this coming from? Is any of this true? And usually the answer is no.
Yeah, well, what is really frightening is the allegation that vaccines don't work, because obviously they do. We're seeing that whenever vaccination hits the 50-60% mark of the population, you're seeing a dramatic decrease in positive tests. I mean, it is working. Of course, it doesn't work, perfectly. No medical intervention works perfectly. We are seeing cases of people who have had both vaccines and still get infected. We have a situation here in Montreal now in the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital, where there's rampant infection, and some of them have had both shots. Most of them have had one shot. And of course, the plague is the variants. And so obviously it doesn't work perfectly against all variants, but we see the overall effect is that cases are going down. Vaccination works.
Yeah, no intervention is 100% effective and has zero risk.
Absolutely.
It's always a risk-benefit analysis.
So Ada, switching to you because of this other nonsense that is spread around about the vaccines, about how they are made from fetal tissue.
Yeah, this is an argument that gets brought up kind of time and again and applied to new things. So I originally wrote an article to counter a claim that there was aborted fetal tissue in fancy perfumes. Spoiler, there isn't. There's also none in any food products, which is something that gets claimed. There's also something going on behind me.
Energy saving mode.
That's fine. It can do that. But so essentially, there is no aborted fetal tissue in vaccines. That full stop. You can take that sentence home if that's your only takeaway. Great. However, in the development of certain vaccines, cells that have been derived from aborted fetuses may be used either in the development of the vaccine or in testing the vaccine. But there's a very important caveat here, which is that the abortions in question that took place to make these cell lines that we are still using today happened over 3 decades ago. So even if you do not agree with abortion, one abortion can allow us to test millions and millions of vaccines and stop a pandemic and save millions and millions of lives. One abortion that happened 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's not like fetuses are being aborted in order to make COVID-19 vaccines.
Exactly. So to get a little bit more technical, the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, they don't use cell lines during their developmental process. They only use it during their testing process. Whereas the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, which are adenovirus vector vaccines, do use fetal-derived cell lines in order to develop their vaccine. And so what that actually means is that, so there are 2 big cell lines being used in the development of vaccines. They're called HEK293, HEK293 cells, and PERC6. And so those 2 cell lines, HEK293 cells, they come from the kidney cells of a fetus that was either aborted or miscarried in 1973. Whether it was aborted or miscarried, we didn't always keep amazing records back then. And for the PERC6 cell, it came from retinal cells, so the back of your eye, from a fetus that was aborted at 18 weeks in 1985. So both are very far in the past, and both have continued to help modern science very much past their abortion or miscarriage. But it's really interesting, especially if you take this information in tandem with the fact that new studies have shown that evangelical white Christians are, of all religious groups, the least likely to get vaccinated. And one of the big reasons that is being suggested is that they the anti-abortion. They do not agree with abortion, so they do not want to take a vaccine that promotes or used abortion in any way to develop it. However, the Pope has something to say about that. Because the thing is we're playing a game of lesser of two evils right now. Getting a vaccine is a choice, but not getting one is just as much of a choice. And choices come with consequences. And so the Pope, the Catholic Church and the Pope himself has deemed that while other vaccines that do not use aborted fetuses in their development should be chosen if they are available, if they are not, you should get these vaccines. And their logic is twofold. One, the abortion in question occurred 3 decades ago. And two, the alternatives to getting the vaccine, which is potentially spreading and infecting your neighbors, is, in their own words, morally repugnant. So the actual quote, in response to a letter sent by a woman in Florida to Pope Benedict, the Catholic Church wrote, "Parents are forced to choose to act against their conscience or to put the health of their children and the population at whole at risk. That is an unjust alternative choice, which must be eliminated as soon as possible."
So basically, the Pope agrees with NACI that the RNA vaccines are the preferred vaccines.
Yes. And the Pope also agrees that spreading COVID is much, much, much worse than taking a vaccine that may have been developed in a way that you don't necessarily 100% agree with.
I have a rhetorical question real quick, which is that I wonder if evangelical Christians who are very anti-abortion do this kind of legwork to figure out if cells from aborted fetuses were used in the development of any kind of medical intervention or medical drug that they're about to take, or if they're only doing this for the vaccine. Because these cell lines are, as we were discussing before we were shooting this, they're so commonly used in labs. I mean, they are part of basic research into so many things that eventually end up on the market. And so if you really are taking that stance, you wouldn't just take it for the vaccines, you would take it for a whole slew of other medical interventions.
Especially cancer treatment, right? Because these cell lines are the key to cancer research. So if you are against the vaccine, you should also be against any kind of cancer treatment. But
from what I can see when I search these up, there's obviously a lot of websites that are not based in evidence on issues such as this, that will scream and cry about how we are apparently aborting fetuses left, right, and center to grind them up and put them into vaccines because that makes sense somehow. That's how vaccines work.
It's the magic juice of vaccines.
Yeah, it's the magic baby juice. But there are a few very comprehensive websites run by Christian scientists where they do actually outline, probably not comprehensive because I don't know that you could ever be comprehensive in this list, but they do outline products that are made with these and suggest alternatives where alternatives are available.
When you say Christian scientists, do you mean scientists who happen to be Christians or Christian scientists?
Yeah, not Christian scientists,
okay,
but rather scientists who follow the Christian faith.
I see. Okay, because I don't think Christian scientists would be making websites that are evidence based about. Yeah, right. There we go. Thank you for the clarification.
But yeah, just full stop to end on the big message here. There is never, has never been, and very likely will never be any fetal tissue in any consumer product. If abortions were involved in the process of developing a medicine or a vaccine that you're taking, they were involved incredibly remotely. But there is never, ever, ever any like fetal tissue that winds up in a consumer product. That is complete fear mongering, complete bullshit.
Well, it's very similar to a little issue we talked about last time about the use of the luciferase enzyme in developing tests for COVID. And now they're all over the internet are saying that they're using the devil's chemical, in these tests. I mean, sometimes you just don't know what to say about these things. They're so outlandish. And no matter how outlandish, though, there are people who buy into it. It's a remarkable phenomenon.
I feel like I had a bit of a mental turning point when, Jonathan, a few years ago, you wrote about the medical medium, when I realized that this dude literally says that he gets messages from an angel from the future, and the message said to make and drink celery juice to cure cancer. Yep. And I'm just like, yeah, okay, that's it. Like, if people will believe that, they'll believe anything. Like, what's the point?
The medical medium is an enigma. in the sense that he's still doing his radio show in Florida. People call in, they pose medical questions to which he gives an answer. Yeah. Why isn't he prosecuted for practicing medicine without a license? Because he's got this ingenious out by saying that the advice doesn't come from him. It comes from spirit connection. So if you want to legally go after someone, go after the spirit doctor. But the spirit doctor, though, does not seem to have an overwhelming amount of knowledge, because everything can be treated celery juice.
Yeah, or certain forms of vitamin D, I think. He has a very limited repertoire of what the cause of your disease might be and what the treatment should be.
But you know what isn't limited is the number of books that he sells.
How many now? At least 4.
I know of this because, when my last book came out, The Grain of Salt, I got a call from the publisher a week after it came out. And he says to me, well, you're going to be very happy because your book made it to the bestseller list in the first week. So I thought, that's great. And then I look up that bestseller list, and I was number 9 on that list.
Okay.
And number 5 was the medical medium with his celery juice diet.
Wow.
So that kind of threw a bit of cold celery juice on my head.
I made celery root soup last night. Do you think he would count that as like celery juice?
You are free of any disease from now moving forward.
Oh, so I can cancel my COVID vaccine appointment tomorrow?
Yes, you don't need it because you've got a celery juice. There you go.
One thing I can tell you is when I make my chicken soup, I always put the celery root in it. And
I love celery root. It's so good. It really
does give it a good flavor.
Mm-hmm. Mine was celery root potato soup.
Yeah. I also remember last summer when all of a sudden celery prices spiked.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable. It was $5-6 for a, and that's when his book came out about celery juice.
And before that, it was the cauliflower, because all of the wellness bloggers realized they could make rice-like products with cauliflower. Right. And I just want to eat cauliflower. Why is it costing $7 a bunch?
There's a lot of ingenuity out there. That's for sure. And you know what I wonder, and we've talked about this, we wonder about, is whether or not these people actually believe what they're doing, what they're saying, or is it just a clever scheme to make money? I mean, does the medical medium actually believe that he's talking to a ghost, in which case he may be schizophrenic, or is this just a very, very clever scheme to suck money out of people's wallets?
It's almost always impossible to know, and it might be some mixture of the two. It's very frustrating, but you can never get inside someone's brain and figure out what's going on.
I think what happens is once they're committed to an issue, the question doesn't even come up to them, whether this is so or not. And my prime example for this here is Joe Mercola, who we have often talked about. To me, he is perhaps the biggest scammer on the internet, just in terms of the number of products that he promotes, which are questionable, and his constant conspiracy theories, all that. With him, I just don't think it's possible to believe in all of the different things that he puts out there. But he obviously is making money. He lives in a $4 million mansion in Chicago.
Wow.
So anyway, all right. We do get questions here, and try to answer them. And I had a very interesting question that I thought it would be worthwhile to answer on this webcast here, because it was a question about bacteria, but more specifically about postbiotics. So let me switch to that. Let me tell you a little bit about postbiotics, and let me try to answer this question. Question was straightforward. What are postbiotics? Now, I know that people have heard about prebiotics. They have heard about probiotics, but what are postbiotics? Let's start with the notion that we, in fact, are more bacteria than human. There are more bacterial cells in the human body than there are human cells.
I apologize, but I have to correct you on this, Joe, because that assessment has been redone somewhat recently, and the current estimate is that it's neck and neck. It's 1-to-1. So
I
they're
thought it
almost.
was. I thought that at first we were all saying 10 times as much.
Uh-huh.
Then I saw the correction to 3 times as much. So now I guess it's coming down.
1-to-1. Yeah, it's coming down.
I think the point is there's a lot of bacteria inside us, no matter if it's equal or more.
Trillions and trillions of bacteria in our body. And the ones that are of great interest are the ones that inhabit our gut, the intestines. It used to be believed that they were just kind of bystanders there, and that at worst they would wreak some havoc, but nobody thought that they were doing any good. Now we know that that's not the case. And this is rather complex here, but at least it gives you an idea of all the different things that these bacteria are doing. Positive things, like they're synthesizing vitamin K, vitamin B12 in our gut. They have a very important role to play in immune function. They connect to the nervous system. They protect us against disease-causing bacteria. In any case, we want to have a good balance of bacteria in our gut, because the so-called good bacteria vie for the same food supply as the potential disease-causing bacteria, and therefore they control them. They don't let the disease-causing bacteria multiply, because there's not enough food for every bacterium, and if the food has to be split among all the different microbes, they keep each other in check. And we know this because so much has been published on this. There are scientific books on this. There are major journals on the microbiome. And of course, there are literally hundreds of books that you can buy on Amazon, which deal with every possible facet of our microbiome, which is the sum total of all the bacteria that are present in our body. So now let's get down to what this term postbiotics means. First of all, we'll start with the probiotics. The probiotics are the so-called good bacteria that inhabit our gut. These are the ones that are increased when we eat probiotic bacteria. These are yogurts and other kinds of foods that are enriched with these bacteria, or things like kimchi, sauerkraut, which are naturally fermented and contain bacteria. So the probiotics are the actual living organisms that we would ingest in order to increase their numbers in our gut. The prebiotics are food for the probiotics. And these are mostly foods that contain a lot of fiber, because the bacteria in our gut need food, and the food that they love is the kind of food that we don't digest very well, the fibrous foods. So they dine on them, and then they defecate. Yes, the bacteria defecate. And what do they release? They release the postbiotics. And these are the chemicals that actually are supposed to be the reason that the probiotics are good for us, because they release these short-chain fatty acids, as they're called, various enzymes, various breakdown products of their cells, and those are the things that are absorbed into the bloodstream and do all of the beneficial things that I mentioned to you before. So here, in a nutshell, is that prebiotics are mostly fibrous foods that serve as a nutritious meal for the probiotics, which then ferment these fibers and produce the short-chain fatty acids and other byproducts, which are the do-gooders that get into the bloodstream and perform all those functions that I mentioned earlier. You can actually purchase supplements of both prebiotics and probiotics. And of course, you don't have to buy prebiotics. You can eat prebiotics, because any food that is high in fiber is actually a prebiotic. And as far as probiotics go, well, there are all kinds of ways that you can increase concentrations in your gut. Eating fermented foods. The trouble with eating fermented foods, though, is that they tend to be very high in salt. But anyway, you can get ready-made packaged bacteria, as it were. Although the number of bacteria that you get, the variety is limited, and we're not really sure how big a variety we need in order to have optimal health benefits. But now you can also buy symbiotics. What are they? That's a mixture of prebiotic and probiotics. So you're getting the bacteria and you're also getting the food that the bacteria want all in one capsule. Postbiotics have recently become available, and they are sometimes literally called postbiotic, as you can see here, but sometimes they are just claimed to have some kind of enhanced immune system function. But what we're dealing with here is a mixture of short-chain fatty acids and other cellular breakdown products that are generated from the probiotics. So there you have an idea about what prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics are. But of course, there are a lot of questions that we raise about these because we really don't have the classic clinical evidence that we want, the randomized controlled double-blind studies that would show whether they're effective or not. But there's a good chance that eating a diet that is high in fiber is a good thing to do, because this is the prebiotics that we need, and these will feed the good bacteria in your gut, make them happy, they will multiply and squeeze out all of the nasty, bad bacteria. So that's where we stand with postbiotics, and hopefully we've answered that question.
That bottle that said science-based nutrition trademark really annoys me because I'm fairly certain that very few dietitians would actually recommend taking those supplements for the lay public.
And of course, when you read the ads for those supplements, there's always the disclaimer at the bottom that this has not been evaluated by FDA. But at least with this whole concept of good and bad bacteria, we're out there on a limb, but the limb is supported by science. So it's worthwhile pursuing this, and it's not the kind of total nonsense that we see with a whole class of other dietary supplements. But a proper diet is really what we need to look for in order to have the right balance of gut bacteria. All right, let's try to wind things up here with Ada and a neat little animal fact.
So geckos, geckos, they shed their skin when they grow, but when they shed that skin, they don't just want to leave it on the ground, because then a predator could find it and help track them. So naturally,
it would be littering.
It would be littering, and then you'd go to gecko jail, and they've got little sticky fingers, so they could maybe try to climb out. But if they're a leopard gecko like mine, they don't have the sticky fingers, so they're just screwed. I don't know. It's a mess. Don't litter. So instead, they eat the skin, and it serves two purposes. One, it helps them hide from predators, and two, it allows them to reclaim all those nutrients, because their skin has, a lot of energy went into developing that skin, and just leaving it on the ground would be a waste.
Cannibalism in the animal kingdom.
Isn't it wouldn't it be autophagy?
Yes, I guess it would technically be autophagy, yeah. Ugh.
The only gecko I'm familiar with is the one that appears in a commercial.
Yes.
TV all the time.
It's for Gecko insurance.
And that it just occurred to me, in fact, a couple of nights ago when I saw that commercial, and after I was thinking about it, I couldn't remember what it was a commercial for.
You just know the gecko.
I knew the gecko, but I still don't know. I don't know what that gecko is advertising.
It's insurance, but I don't know what kind of insurance.
It's Geico Insurance Company. Other companies are available, by the way. We're not promoting Geico.
All right.
But that's the thing. It's a play on word, Geico, gecko.
My gecko is named Geico, but that's because my fiancé named him when he got him, and he was 10 or 9. So.
Okay, so we covered a lot of topics here today. You learned a little bit about denim and about indigo, about contributing to cancer research. You also learned that sunglasses, the efficacy is not determined by the price. You can have cheap ones that are just as good as the expensive ones. And no, there are no aborted fetuses in vaccines of any kind. And maybe you know a little bit more about prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. And most important of all, you know that geckos shed their skin and they eat it.
Yummy.
And that brings us to the end. But we'll be back with you again with another webcast in 2 weeks' time. And who knows what interesting facts you will learn then. So, Ada, we will look forward to another crazy animal fact. All right. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks.